Back on the draft prospect grind today, talking about Gradey Dick, maybe the best shooter in the draft, but where are his other skills? Does he have enough to be on the court in the NBA? Should the Pacers consider taking him with the seventh or any pick? We'll get to all of it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI. And today, in the spirit of draft coverage, it's Gradey Dick Day here on Locked On Pacers as we continue to cut through a lot of these top 10 prospects. We've done the Thompson twins, the commonly mocked top 3, and Cam Whitmore so far, with Gradey Dick coming today. Speaking of Cam Whitmore, he worked out for the Pacers in a solo workout yesterday. You can hear more about him on an episode earlier this week and read about the workout on SI Pacers. Today, though, it's Gradey Dick with Locked On Jayhawks host Derek Johnson. We get into everything: his shooting, his defense, what he can do that isn't just shooting, why he's considered a high-level prospect despite having some clear limitations. Does he make sense for the Pacers? We get to it all today. Let's just get right to it. Derek Johnson is here, and we're talking about Kansas sharpshooter Gradey Dick today, except I'm already going to push back on the sharpshooter term. He is more than that to me as a player, and that is where I think analysis of him is really interesting. But, of course, that is where you start when talking about Gradey Dick. Derek hosts our Locked On Jayhawks podcast. He knows the Kansas basketball team better than anyone. And Gradey Dick, of course, the highlight package of his tape at Kansas, what he's going to be billed for as a prospect, is the shooting. What do you make of his outside shot and how he kind of leverages it to be everything about his game, whether that's running guys off the line, all sorts of stuff he does?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about an absolutely elite release. A guy who's 6'7", 6'8", shoots it at a really high arc from above his head, and it allows him, because he has a quick release in addition to the high release, to get off threes in a myriad of ways. And even when he is contested, there's some games where you'll see him hit some threes where you're like, that guy was kind of playing perfect defense, and it'll go down. Spot up shooting, off the dribble a little bit, kind of off movement. Like, there's some things that he's still trying to hone and work on, from, I think, the intricacies of getting the 3-point range, but the shot itself is beautiful. KU back in the last offseason, had some former pros, some former KU players come back and just kind of, scrimmage around with the team and have some fun. One of them was Brandon Rush, who, I don't know, had about a decade in the NBA, and he was talking to Bill Self, the head coach for Kansas, about how basically it is. He just has like this unblockable 3-point shot, and that it's going to be absolutely devastating. He had a bit of a dip over the course of the season once we got to Big 12 play in terms of 3-point shooting. Some teams are face guarding him, but I think once you get to the NBA, there's going to be a little bit less of that, a little less focus on him. He won't be the primary option or the secondary option in theory on the court, at least right away in the beginning of his time. But I mean, the shot itself is beautiful, and it is made for NBA basketball right off the bat.
Yeah, that's the first note I had, is how fast he gets a shot off. The first game I watched was at Missouri, which was pretty early in Kansas's season, right? So he was still kind of being face guarded, but he had 15 points in like the first 8 minutes of this game. Like, he's open a lot, he's making plays with the ball. And then the second game I watched was they hosted Baylor, and you can already see Scott Drew's like, okay, we're gonna have somebody facing you even when you're in the corner. It's like already feels like the NBA, where he's providing spacing just by existing, right? And Kansas made this furious comeback in that game, in part because Gradey Dick's impact in that second half, where he scored like 2 points in this whole stretch. But Kansas is going crazy because they're just terrified of him even having the chance to catch with a little bit of space. And I think that the shot is where so much of his game kind of comes out from, because he does have other skills, and we'll talk about them. But I think a lot of what he does zooms out from that. Teams are like, oh, crap. Even if we're 2 steps away from him, he's just going to shoot right over you. And when you can make 40% of, I forget the exact number, he took 200 and something, a lot of them, you have to guard it. And that's a very obvious translatable NBA skill, and why it's so clear to many that he's going to go in the lottery at some point.
Yeah, and I would I'll give you a little bit of homework. This could be a fun one to look at. It was at the beginning of the season, so it might not be the ultimate Gradey Dick experience in terms of the finished product, so to speak, what he was by the end of the season. But the NC State game toward the beginning of the year, it was the Bahamas Invitational, whatever they call that tournament. And it really was a tale of kind of two halves. The first half was everything you would want, imagine, envision for a guy who is a sharpshooter from the outside, hitting tough threes against NC State. And then the second half kind of struggled a little bit with the jump shots, still found ways to get to the line and impact the game a little bit. But that would be one that I would add for you if you're trying to look back on some Gradey Dick stuff.
Yeah, I've talked about this before on some other guys. I try to do a best game and a worst game to see like what the difference was, and then try to find just some in the middle ones. So then you can really see like, okay, when this guy's at his best, here's what he does well. When he's at his worst, here's what's going wrong. And then you can kind of find the middle ground in between that. And Kansas kind of went as Gradey Dick went, right? Like when he had fewer than 10 points, I think they were like an under 500 team, and they were really good this year, right? So he was a big factor in what they do offensively, but we've talked about his shooting, even though I said I don't view him as just a shooter. It's really interesting to me. Like one of my favorite things he does, and something I think about a lot with prospects who are good shooters, is like when they get to the NBA, the defenders are taller, faster, can jump higher. Like if they can defend your shot, what else can you do? What other thing can you do when you get run off the line? Gradey Dick's got this really funny, like he holds the ball up so high, like he's about to shoot, and just one dribble to his left side, and he just hits a long two. And long twos aren't encouraged in the NBA, but if you're just drilling these wide open counters, that's great. And I think his passing is, when he gets run off the lines, pretty good, even though I wouldn't be like, oh, he's this high level passer. I don't know what you think of all this, but I think the fact that he has some abilities when run off the line makes me more encouraged about what his NBA game will look like, especially given what he did at Kansas.
Yeah, I think the hope would be, I don't know if you want to toss out a name, like the hope would be Ray Allen. I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but you're talking about a 3-point shooter who was more than that. He could hit those floaters and kind of drive it on the deck a little bit at times. That would be the hope for what you can get out of Gradey Dick. And yeah, there was more there than just the 3-point shooting. A lot of it was set up because of the 3-point shooting. Really good cutter off the ball. Really good ability to, kind of read the defense. And if they're putting too much attention on him, just kind of cut away from his man and get an open lane. He's a good athlete. I wouldn't say he's a great athlete, but he's a good athlete, has enough verticality. He'll dunk on you if you give him the chance, especially if he can backdoor the opposition. He's good in transition. He's good running the lane. He'll attack the rim straight out in transition. Good in spot-up situations. I think he was in the 86th percentile last year on synergy and in transition scoring. So he finds other ways to score the basketball. Clearly, there are ways he's still looking to improve. Like, he's not really somebody who's going to, hit you with like a straight line drive to the rim, or he's going to finish a ton through contact. Most of his buckets around the rim were more so on cuts or getting the ball fed to him or in transition. But he has, it seems like, more growth to his game than just being a spot up shooter. Like, I don't think this is a player who comes in and I'm blanking on the kid's name, Vanderbilt shooter who went like at the end of the lottery or something to the Celtics
Aaron
a few years
Nesmith,
ago.
a Pacers
Yes,
player.
Aaron Nesmith. I don't think this is an Aaron Nesmith where it's like he's just being brought in to shoot threes. I think there is more there with Gradey Dick. Now, will he develop into that? Will he just become a set shooter? That'll be the ultimate question. But I think there's more meat on the bone there.
Yeah, I wonder if he could be like a Kevin Huerter, maybe someone like that at the NBA level. And the cuts are really interesting because we talked about him getting face guarded. He's really good at like the coach's son, kind of like lean one way, cut the other way really fast, and get like that kind of stuff to get open. That's all impressive. He had in the Baylor game, he finished an alley-oop dunk, and I was like, oh, he's up pretty high on that play. Like he's not athletic, I wouldn't say, but he can get up there because he's tall. But the thing about his offense that's interesting is he has all these little mechanisms that you just said to like finish plays and get open, but he hasn't, like, this would be my biggest knock on him offensively as a prospect, is he hasn't put a lot of pressure on the rim. He only took 80 layups this season, like the whole season, and that includes dunks. His free throw rate's really low, and that's generally an indicator that NBA teams like to look at of like, okay, you can create your shots or make a defense rotate and draw fouls. And so the shooting's good, the counters are good, the passing's fine, but if you can't be putting pressure on the rim all the time, it's like guys are just going to hug you and do their best to take you out of the game. And it's not that easy. If you're a good cutter, you'll find ways to get open. Doug McDermott did that for the Pacers for years, but the lack of rim pressure and gravity is kind of where I would be not concerned, I would say, but just like, okay, this is where there's a big limit on his offense. Hey guys, one short little break so I could talk to you about FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA Finals because right now new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. You can get great promotions every day on FanDuel. They have a safe and secure app. You can get paid your money instantly. There's no better place to bet on all the NBA Finals action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Yeah, and that's why I think whoever's going to draft him, you're going to probably end up thinking this is like the perfect complementary player, the perfect role player, because he doesn't really need the ball in his hands. He doesn't need to dribble it out. He can sit in the corner and shoot threes for you. He can work off movement. He's the defense is certainly interesting, and we'll get to that here later. But there's enough there that he can be complimentary. I will say one other thing that he does well on the offensive end to score some points. He'll have some moments where he really is a good offensive rebounder. It's not all the time because, I mean, he's a wing, so a lot of times he's asked to get back on transition defense. But there were some key plays throughout the year. I mean, there were a couple games Kansas does not win this year that they won close games where he just worked out an extra offensive possession for them in a close game. The Oklahoma State game comes to mind. He did it a couple times where he just crashes the offensive glass. And because there's so much attention to him as a three-point shooter, he's able to get kind of a cleaner run to the lane. And he actually ended up being a good offensive rebounder, whether it was to just get it and tap it out or to go back up with an offensive rebound. Ended up having some crucial plays for Kansas. So I don't know that the overall numbers on the season show that he's this great offensive rebounder, but I think there is a lot there. Now, obviously in the NBA, a lot of teams, probably less so than college, are crashing the offensive glass ad nauseum. But I mean, that's there, and that's another way that he can kind of impact the game in a small level.
Yeah, I agree with that. I put his rebounding in my notes. I'm mostly from defensive stuff, but like when he's around the basket, he's going to get up and get it, and that matters. The last thing I would mention about his offense, he never turns it over, right? Like low mistakes kind of player, even with passes. I think that is important. But there's a reason Gradey Dick is I don't know what the right word is. Right, polarizing seems wrong. It's not like there's like this big internet feud about Gradey Dick, but there is the whole other side of the ball. A lot of people like really kill his defense. It's not good. It's definitely not good. His foot speed is fine. I think like he chops it and stays in front of people, but he can't really fight through screens. He can get bullied a lot. Like his off-ball defense is better than some prospects. I think he stands in the right place. I'm just saying buzzwords. I feel like they're like, in general, if he has to guard a guy in front of him, it's not a strength of his. It does not go well. And that is certainly concerning in the NBA, even though I'm of the opinion, and I think many are now, that if you're his size in the NBA, if you can either shoot or defend, I say this so often that my listeners probably drives them crazy at this point. You just got to do one, and you can be on the floor in the NBA. He can be on the floor if the shot translates. That's enough. But if he can't defend at all, that's really going to limit what he can be in the NBA. I'm curious, you saw all of it, what you think of his defense. Does he have any sort of redeeming qualities on that end? The perception, is it right? What do you feel like about all that?
I actually think there's a little more there. I'm not trying to say that he's this like elite defender, was even a plus defender last year at Kansas. But the thing that I always look at with defense, especially for young guys like freshmen, what is your want to level? Well, I mean, we've seen before guys who come in and they're not really trying that hard on defense. But with Gradey Dick, he was always trying. He was trying to be in the right spots. And there were times when he would get lost off the ball. There were times when he would, as you mentioned, get blown by if he was guarding, smaller, quicker guard. And so that stuff's not ideal. And obviously, but he was always trying at it. And what that tells me is that, right, like it was never a problem of the want to, which that's half of the battle on the defensive end of the floor. A lot of the issue was just inexperience, him being green on that end. And so I think if you give him a couple years, can he at least be like a solid team defender where he's not like a great individual defender, but can he be a solid team defender? Can he do enough for you on that end where he, even if he's a below average defender, that might be good enough. So I think there's enough there. He actually was really good at anticipating and getting steals. That was one thing that he was good at.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And then you look at the synergy numbers. He was, at the end of the day, I think there was a little bit lost in the idea that if you watched a lot of Kansas games, a lot of opposing teams would target him. And Kansas ran a switching scheme that at times they switched 1 through 4, other times of the season they switched 1 through 5. So there were times when he would get guarded on, like an Adam Flagler or an LJ Crowder, like one of these guards who could really score at the collegiate level, who's like 6'1", is really quick, really fast. And I don't know that benefits him the best, because those are a lot of times when he struggled. And so when you look at Kansas defensively, you had DeJuan Harris, who was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. You had Kevin McCullough, who, for my money, was the best defensive player in the Big 12 and probably could have won that award over DeJuan Harris. When you were an opposing team, KJ Adams was a solid enough defender. It's not necessarily that they were always targeting Gradey Dick just because he was a bad defender. It's sometimes just because he was the weakest link on a team that had a lot of good defenders. And so what you ended up having was him getting attacked a lot. So you would notice over the course of games that they're constantly going at this guy. Yeah, some of that was he's a freshman, and again, he wasn't an elite defender, but some of that was just, well, we're not going to go at that other guy, right? And so you look at the synergy numbers, actually ended up being pretty good. 65th percentile in overall half-court defense, 64th percentile in man-to-man defense. Both of those are classified as good on synergy. So I think there's more there than you would expect. Again, I think he was probably closer to being like an average defender at the collegiate level. So you're probably looking at, below average to poor once you get to the NBA level. But again, if we go back to the idea that there is that 1-2 on that defensive end of the court, that once he starts to realize what he's doing and once he gets more comfortable in that, I think he can be at least a good enough team defender to make the offense work.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you've heard this before, but some people talk about defensive skills in 3 buckets. It's can't, won't, doesn't know how. I think the hope would be for him as a freshman, especially, is that he's in doesn't know how and not can't. And so in the NBA, with the right teaching, with the right coaching, with the right system, like, I don't think he'll ever be like an awesome on-ball defender. I don't think anybody thinks that. I don't even know if Gradey Dick thinks he'll be an awesome on-ball defender in the NBA. But if you get him in the right spots, he's already got a decent read of the game. The steal rate is good, 2.5% solid. That he can be that team defender guy. I actually thought his positioning was pretty good, but like once he actually had to rotate over, he just got destroyed. Like he was too frail for a lot of the contact situations. So at least there was a deterrent there. I think that's good, and maybe that suggests that he will know how, and he'll be better on that end. But I ended up not concerned. Like, that's never the right way to put it. These guys are 19 years old, but just like, man, he's gonna have to figure out something on that end of the floor, whether that's being a touch faster, right, with his lateral movements that he can stay in front of guys, whether that's just being a step quicker with those rotations so guys just can't go right through him. I don't know what it is, but it's just like there's not an obvious way to me that what happened at Kansas isn't going to happen in the NBA, where he is targeted, right? And I actually think it's good for Kansas prospects that they go through a switching scheme before the NBA. That'll make him a step ahead of some guys. That's good. But at the same time, you're going to be switching in the NBA. Basically every NBA team does like size switching at some point. You're going to have to guard somebody sometime. How are you going to do it? What's going to be your thing? And I think there has to be some sort of physical stature improvement, because I do think the team defense is going to be there at some point. Not right away. It never is for a rookie right away. But how's he going to stop the guy across from him? I'm not sure how that's going to happen yet.
Yeah, and I think you bring something important up with the stature. I mean, about 200 pounds, 205 pounds for Gradey Dick, and at 6'7", 6'8", there should be room to grow in terms of that physical build. So if you can get him up to, 215, 220, even 225, then maybe you can even get away with him at times playing as a 4. You know what I mean? If you're playing kind of a smaller situation, and that might be more beneficial to him from a foot speed perspective on the defensive end of the court. I think you're spot on. I don't know if you'll ever get to that point with him being this at least average team defender by the time you reach the end of the first portion of his rookie contract, before you would have to start giving out the team options and stuff. But I think right around there is where you're looking to. And I don't know how that affects his, I guess, NBA view of things, because ideally, if you're taking someone in the lottery or in the kind of middle of the first round, you'd like to be able to give them that second contract, have them extended on some of the team option stuff, to where is this going to be a guy who is more of like a journeyman who goes around place to place and is a good shooter, and they're still trying to develop, and it's the second team that ends up with him that he's able to figure out the defense? Does that make him any less valuable? I don't know, but I would be willing to take that risk with him, just because I just go back to the idea that it was never for a lack of trying. And Bill Self, historically, especially with freshmen, has been very cautious about playing them big minutes if they're at least not giving good effort on the defensive end of the floor. MJ Rice came in this past year. He was a 5-star recruit, never really cracked the rotation because he couldn't really figure that stuff out. I mean, Sheck Diallo about a decade ago ended up being an early second-round pick by the Clippers.
What a throwback name.
I know, right? Well, and he wasn't even playing in the rotation come the NCAA tournament. He was playing, sub 10 minutes per game when he was, because he couldn't figure out the defensive side of the ball. So the fact that Bill Self kept Gradey Dick on the floor for, 30 plus minutes per game shows you that he at least had some bare minimum level of trust, that he was giving at least a decent effort, and that he was at least showing improvement to some degree on the defensive end of the court.
So you talked about, NBA life a little bit there. What do you make of his game and compared to the way the NBA is played now, how he would fit into it? Because obviously, look, it's really easy to go, oh, look, the Celtics just took 53s a game in the conference finals. Like, a good shooter is going to fit in the NBA. But in general, there's a lot of movement. Defense is important. Transition rates are going up. At the same time, the playoff game's totally different from that. There's a lot of layers to what the NBA game is now. How do you feel like his game fits in what the NBA is today?
Well, I think it'll help him with the additional spacing that you get out in the NBA with the combination of the bigger floor and just better athletes all around. That is going to open him up a little bit more. At Kansas, he was basically the second option behind Jalen Wilson, but like, they got in the NCAA tournament, and Eric Musselman, the head coach for Arkansas, said he was their first, the primary option they were trying to take away, because going back to what you mentioned earlier, when he did well, KU did well, right? And so from that standpoint, when he walks on an NBA floor, I mean, I guess it kind of depends what team he goes to, whether he would be like a fifth starter or, I don't know, an eighth man, ninth man off the bench. It just kind of depends how that all works out. But he's not going to be one of those top two options on the floor at that point in time. He's going to be more of that spot up shooter role, which I think is going to help him out early on. Something that he definitely will need to improve, and this goes back to the shooting. The shot is there. There's a lot there. It's movement without the ball. When he did get face guarded at times this season, he sometimes struggled to make an impact on the game and figured out or struggled to figure out other ways to try to make that impact. And that's something that comes with age. Like Ochai Agbaji, who was, end of lottery pick the season before, he was basically what Gradey Dick was as a 3-point shooter, just in terms of impact and percentages and stuff at KU. But he was so good moving without the ball. But it took him till his senior year to figure that out. It takes time. And so Gradey Dick, as a freshman, was still learning some of the stuff, how to move without the ball, how to operate off a screen. I think he was just in the 34th percentile in shooting off screens. So he's still figuring out some of the nuances of the game. But I think that's exciting, because you have a kid who shot 40% from three as a freshman without knowing some of those little intricacies that he's going to learn at an even better rate in the NBA, where that is now his job and he doesn't have to go to school, to where I would imagine he's going to benefit from playing in the NBA in a lot of different ways on the offensive end. Certainly, there are a lot of those questions about the defensive end because of the more spacing and possibly the lack of lateral quickness on the defensive end of the floor. But he feels like, to me, a very high floor prospect because of the fact of that shot, that at the very least, he can be someone who can be kind of a journeyman 3-point shooter. And that if the defense is at least decent and some of the other offensive stuff and rebounding comes together, then maybe you do have potential to be a really impactful player, is kind of like a fourth best starter on a good playoff team.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think, too, DeJuan Harris is good. I think really good setup men or passers will help him, too. Just like, oh, wow, I'm the second I get open, I have the ball to shoot now. And Harris was fine, but the rest of Kansas, it's like pulling teeth to get them to pass. Sometimes it felt like when I was going through some of these possessions, Jalen Williams, who's very good, Jalen Wilson. There's a lot of Jalen Williams in the NBA. Jalen Wilson, I was like, give Gradey Dick the ball, please, just for my viewing experience. Again, not to dump on these guys. They're good players. I think better passers will be helpful for him. And a word you said earlier I want to bring up is complementary piece. Like, I think as a role-playing shooter type, a movement shooter type, he'll be super valuable next to any team in whatever range he gets picked in, top 10, top 15, whatever, that already has a really good creator. The team we're talking on the podcast for, the Pacers do, and Tyrese Halliburton. I'm not saying the Pacers should or shouldn't pick him at 7, but I would say if they did pick him, he would fit well with Tyrese Halliburton, and that is exceedingly important to the Pacers draft process. But even like, again, I don't think Gradey Dick's going to go 5th, but like Detroit has good creators already. Like any team that has guards who can get their teammates the ball is going to be a good landing spot for him, because as that complementary piece, that's really valuable. And I think that sometimes people think lottery picks, like, okay, if you're picking a guy in the top 14, the expectation is like good starter or all-star. And like, that's just not reality. There's like maybe 2 or 3 all-stars per year in the lottery. So if you get a solid complementary player, that's good. But there are also a lot of questions about the totality of his game and things like that makes it not that easy. But any team with a high-level good creator already, I think he'll just slide right in and be able to do some stuff pretty early on in his career.
Yeah, John Hollinger for The Athletic always talks about that typically there's about 20 guys in every draft class that end up being either really good players or just sticking at all in the
Right.
NBA. And you feel good that Gradey Dick's going to be one of those guys. And I think it's just a philosophical question to your point. Like, yeah, ideally at pick 7, I think Jamal Murray went like pick 7 or something right around there. Like, ideally, you're getting something like that, but that's not always the case. And in the draft,
very rarely
right,
is the case. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, hypothetically, if you could say, was Kyle Korver, was he worth the 7th overall pick in his given draft class? I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that draft class, but you're talking about a guy who played in the NBA for, I don't know, darn near 20 years and was at least one-time all-star in one of the years with the Hawks. And I don't know, is that worth the 7 pick? Maybe not, but I feel like the floor is at least there with Gradey Dick, that you're going to get something out of him. And I do think from, your standpoint here with the Pacers, because of the fact that, Tyrese Halliburton is kind of your star that you're working around, I do think that kind of opens things up to make things a little easier on figuring out the other role players around him. And I think that would be a fun little wing core with both him and Ben Mathurin on the outside.
To answer your question, if you knew when you were picking Kyle Korver that you got his whole career, he's 7, easily 7. He was in a sick draft in 2003, so a little unfair to look at that specifically, but like that's how I would view the 7th pick. Like if you get Kyle Korver, you're like, hell yeah, all right, we'll take it. So I think Gradey Dick's really interesting. I think he is I think the one-dimensional billing is fair, but I think there is room to grow for him, and I think that some of the labels about him are wrong, but I do think that he's still a limited player. I want to close with this because obviously you're on campus. Rock Chalk. There we go. Look at me go. Do you know him well at all? What kind of person is he? How will that kind of blend in for him in a pro basketball culture?
Yeah, so I mean, every time we get to see him at press conferences and just kind of around, he's a really goofy kid. He's goofy, fun-loving. Like anytime you would ask the other KU basketball players about like who's the funniest player on the team, most often Gradey Dick was the answer. He's someone who keeps it loose, keeps it light in the locker room. He likes to joke around with the other players. Very personable type of player. Got a couple really good parents too. Like he's someone who you put him in whatever locker room and you feel like he's going to be kind of an amoeba. He'll just adjust to it and he'll be a good kind of culture fit to wherever brings him in.
Well, every NBA team would love to have that and hear that. Derek, thank you very much for the time. Where can people follow you and your work covering the Kansas Jayhawks if they want to know more about Gradey Dick or Jalen Wilson or any other Kansas players?
Yeah, you can find Locked On Jayhawks wherever you get any of your podcasts or on YouTube as well. You can hit me up on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. And so if you have any questions, who knows, maybe Jalen Wilson will find his way or to Indiana, or maybe we'll have a future player on that, next year could have some interesting ones with Elmarco Jackson and some others. So
Brandon Rush was a Pacer. I'm trying to think of any other recent there has to be some more recent Kansas Pacers, right?
Oh gosh, Rush is the only one that comes to mind. I mean, at this point, Svi Mikhailuk is kind of hitting up the NBA tour, so I don't know. Maybe he makes his way there at some point. But no, I don't think right now, off the top of my head.
Yeah, there haven't been any recently. Now that I even have the list of the Kansas guys in front of me. Well, maybe this will be the year that it changes. Follow Derek. Follow his work covering the Jayhawks. Next week, we'll start digging into the free agents by position profiles here at Locked On Pacers and more draft content. Still want to get to Jarris Walker, Taylor Hendricks, and a few more guys. Thank you guys a ton for listening. See you soon.